The grand piano sat in the center of the lobby like a monument to wealth, its polished ebony surface reflecting the crystal chandeliers overhead. James stood 20 feet away, his worn canvas shoes squeaking faintly against the Italian marble floor. His thin jacket, the only one he owned, hung loose on his frame, and the frayed cuffs disappeared into fists clenched at his sides. Around him, executives in $1,000 suits moved with practiced indifference, their conversations punctuated by laughter that never reached their eyes. The air smelled of expensive cologne and fresh-cut flowers arranged in vases that probably cost more than his monthly rent. James had rehearsed this moment for 3 weeks. Every night after his shift at the warehouse ended at midnight, he'd walk 40 minutes to the community center, wait for the janitor to unlock the side door, and practice on their beaten upright until his fingers went numb. His mother's voice played on loop in his memory. Asterisk music isn't just sound. It's proof you existed at asterisk. She died 6 months ago, her hands still calloused from 20 years of cleaning office buildings to pay for his childhood piano lessons. The cancer took her before she could see him perform anywhere that mattered. The headquarters of Meridian Financial occupied 47 floors of steel and glass in downtown Manhattan. James had never been inside a building where the elevator buttons required a keycard. He'd never walked on floors so clean he could see his reflection. Every surface whispered the same message: "You don't belong here." The receptionist had barely looked up when he'd entered, her manicured nails clicking against her keyboard as she gestured vaguely toward the waiting area. A group of junior analysts clustered near the windows, their voices carrying across the cavernous space as they debated market projections and weekend plans in the Hamptons. The piano remained untouched, decorative. James had read about it online. A custom Steinway Model D, donated by the company's founder, meant to symbolize the harmony between profit and culture. In 5 years, no one had played it publicly. The elevator chimed. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Richard Caldwell stepped into the lobby with the measured pace of someone who'd never waited for anything in his life. 6'2", silver hair combed back with precision, navy suit cut to emphasize shoulders that still held their athletic frame despite his 58 years. He wore his glasses like armor, thin gold frames that caught the light and made it impossible to read his expression. 2 assistants flanked him, their tablets glowing as they whispered updates he acknowledged with microscopic nods. His reputation preceded him like a cold wind. Youngest CEO in Meridian's history, architect of 3 Fortune 500 mergers, famous for firing entire departments before lunch and never explaining why. James's throat tightened. He'd sent 17 emails over 2 months, each one carefully crafted to request exactly 5 minutes of consideration. He'd included recordings, references, even a handwritten letter explaining why this mattered. Every message had disappeared into the void. So he'd come in person, gambling everything on the slim chance that showing up might mean something. He stepped forward. His voice cracked on the first word. "Mr. Caldwell." The CEO's eyes flicked toward him, then away. The dismissal took less than a second. His assistants moved to form a barrier, their bodies angled to block James from getting closer. One of them, a woman in her 30s with the expression that suggested she dealt with interruptions like this daily, spoke without warmth. "If you have business with Mr. Caldwell, schedule it through the appropriate channels." "I tried," James said. "For 2 months. I sent." "Then you have your answer." She turned back to her tablet. The analyst by the window had stopped pretending not to watch. James felt their stares like hands pushing him toward the door. His fingers trembled as he pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket, a letter his mother had written 3 weeks before she died, her handwriting shaky but determined. He'd carried it every day since the funeral. "My mother used to clean this building," James said, louder now. "4th floor, night shift, 12 years. She saved everything she earned to send me to Juilliard. I dropped out when she got sick, worked doubles to pay for treatment that didn't work. She made me promise I'd find a way back to music, that I wouldn't let poverty decide what I was worth." His voice broke. "I just need 5 minutes to play. That's all. 5 minutes to show what she died giving me." Richard stopped walking. He turned, slowly, and for the first time looked directly at James. The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. When the CEO finally spoke, his voice carried the temperature of a January wind off the Hudson. "Do you know how many people come through these doors every day with a sob story and an outstretched hand?" He gestured toward the piano. That instrument is worth $200,000. It's not a prop for your therapy session. It's not here to validate your feelings or help you process your grief. It's art, and art requires more than desperation. Scattered laughter rippled through the watching crowd. One of the analysts muttered something about another scammer, just loud enough to be heard. James's face burned. He wanted to disappear, to reverse time, to send every email and erase the past 3 weeks of hope. But his mother's letter weighed heavy in his pocket. He remembered her last words, spoken through an oxygen mask in a room that smelled like disinfectant. Don't let them make you small. Before we move forward, I want to hear from you. Yes, you watching this right now. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Are you in New York, Los Angeles, somewhere across the world? I read every single comment, and I want to know whose story this might be touching. Richard adjusted his glasses, preparing to walk away. The assistants had already turned their backs. In 10 seconds, this moment would be over, filed away as another awkward interruption in an executive's busy morning. James heard his own voice as if from a distance. I'll make you a deal. The CEO paused. Excuse me. Let me play. One piece. If you think I'm wasting your time after 30 seconds, I'll leave and never contact you again. James's hands had stopped shaking. Adrenaline flooded his system, drowning out the fear. But if I'm as good as I say I am, if I can prove that talent matters more than tax brackets, then you give me 5 minutes of actual consideration. Not for money, not for a job, just a real conversation about why I'm here. Someone in the crowd whispered, "He's insane." Richard's expression remained unreadable behind those gold frames. He glanced at the piano, then back at James. A full 10 seconds passed. 15. The tension in the lobby had become a physical presence, pressing down on everyone watching. You're serious, Richard said finally. Not a question, an observation tinged with something that might have been curiosity or contempt. Yes. Another pause. Then, to everyone's shock, the CEO gestured toward the piano. One piece. 30 seconds. If I'm not impressed, security will escort you out and you'll be flagged in our system. You'll never set foot in this building again. He removed his glasses, cleaning them with a cloth from his pocket, then replaced them with deliberate precision. And for the record, I've heard concert pianists perform. My ex-wife graduated from Berkeley. I know the difference between competence and excellence. James walked to the piano on legs that barely held him. The bench felt foreign beneath him, too smooth, too expensive, too far from the splintered wood he'd practiced on. His hands hovered over the keys. In his mind, his mother sat beside him like she had when he was 8 years old, her rough palms guiding his fingers into position. Feel the music before you play it, she told him. Let it live in your chest first. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and began. The first notes cut through the lobby like light through fog. Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, not the obvious choice, not the crowd pleaser most amateurs attempted. James's fingers moved with surgical precision through the opening phrases, each note crystalline and intentional. The melody started soft, almost conversational, the kind of restraint that only came from years of technical discipline married to genuine understanding. Richard had started to turn away after 5 seconds, his mind already composing the dismissal. But something in the phrasing made him stop. The kid wasn't just playing the notes, he was saying something with them. The dynamics shifted like a conversation between old friends, intimate and unforced. By the 15th second, Richard's hand had frozen halfway to his phone. The analysts by the window had gone silent. One of them, a Juilliard graduate herself who'd abandoned performance for the security of finance, felt something crack open in her chest. She recognized the technique immediately, the subtle variations in tempo, the way James leaned into certain phrases while letting others breathe. This wasn't someone who'd learned from YouTube tutorials. This was conservatory-level training, the kind that cost $50,000 a year and accepted 1% of applicants. James's eyes remained closed, but his body told a story his face couldn't. His shoulders rose and fell with the music's breathing rhythm. When the piece shifted into its more aggressive middle section, his entire frame moved forward, coaxing darker tones from the Steinway's bass register. The sound filled the 4-foot ceiling, bouncing off marble and glass until the whole lobby became a resonance chamber. 30 seconds passed. Richard didn't call time. The security guard by the door, a 50-year-old former Marine named Thompson who'd worked this lobby for a decade, found himself blinking rapidly. He'd seen thousands of people walk through these doors, most of them barely registered as human to him anymore, just bodies in expensive clothes moving from point A to point B. But this kid, this scrawny nobody in a second-hand jacket, was pulling something out of the piano that Thompson hadn't known existed. It reminded him of his daughter's elementary school recitals, before the divorce, before everything fell apart. The memory hit like a physical blow. One of Richard's assistants, the woman who'd dismissed James moments earlier, shifted uncomfortably. She'd worked for the CEO for 7 years, navigating his moods and demands with practiced efficiency. She knew what impressed him: projections that beat estimates, deals that closed ahead of schedule, ruthless efficiency in every interaction. Music wasn't supposed to matter here. Art was decoration, tax-deductible sponsorship of the ballet to maintain social standing. But her boss hadn't moved in 4 to 5 seconds. His jaw had tightened in that specific way that meant his assumptions were being challenged. James reached the piece's first major climax, a cascading run of notes that required both hands to cross repeatedly, each finger landing with split-second timing. Most pianists rushed this section, eager to prove their speed. James slowed it down fractionally, letting each note resonate before the next arrived. The effect was devastating. The music became a physical force, pushing against the careful neutrality everyone in the lobby had perfected. A woman near the elevator, a senior vice president named Patricia Chen who'd started as a file clerk and clawed her way up through 2 decades of 18-hour days, felt tears threatening. She'd given up painting to work in finance, telling herself that art was a luxury she couldn't afford while supporting 3 kids and an aging mother. She'd made peace with that sacrifice years ago, or thought she had. But hearing this music, watching this kid pour everything into keys that wouldn't love him back, dragged all those buried dreams back to the surface. Richard's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. His next meeting was scheduled to start in 4 minutes. He didn't move. The Juilliard graduate by the window pulled out her phone, fingers shaking as she started recording. She'd never seen anything like this, not at conservatory galas, not at Carnegie Hall benefit concerts where donors paid $5,000 a plate to hear world-class musicians. Those performances were polished, professional, technically flawless. This was something else entirely. This was someone playing like his life depended on the next note, because it did. James's fingers found the transition into the piece's slower, more introspective middle section. The tempo dropped. The volume fell to barely a whisper. In the sudden quiet, every breath in the lobby became audible. 60 people stood frozen, afraid that moving would shatter whatever spell had been cast. The music shifted from technical display to raw emotion, grief, yes, but also defiance. A refusal to be erased. Thompson, the security guard, thought about his ex-wife, about the piano they'd bought their daughter for her 7th birthday. They'd sold it during the divorce to split the assets. He wondered if his daughter still played, if she remembered the lessons she'd begged for. He hadn't called her in 3 months. Richard's hand moved to his glasses. He removed them slowly, cleaning the lenses with mechanical precision, despite the fact they weren't dirty. It was a tell he'd worked decades to eliminate, the gesture he made when forced to reconsider a position he'd held with certainty. His eyes, now unshielded, fixed on James with an intensity that made his assistants exchange glances. They'd seen their boss negotiate billion-dollar mergers without blinking. They'd never seen him look vulnerable. James pushed into the final section, the part where Chopin's genius became undeniable. The themes from the opening returned transformed, darkened by everything that had come between. Technical difficulty merged with emotional truth until the distinction disappeared. His hands moved across the keys with a fluidity that suggested he'd been born at this piano, that every practice session since age 5 had been preparation for this exact moment. Patricia Chen stopped fighting the tears. Let them fall silently down her cheeks as she stood in her $10,000 suit, surrounded by colleagues who'd spent their entire careers learning not to feel anything. Beside her, a young analyst named David Morrison who'd been at Meridian for 8 months felt something shift in his chest. He'd taken this job because his father told him art history degrees were worthless, that real men worked in finance. He'd believed it. convinced himself that money mattered more than meaning. The music wasn't letting him believe that anymore. James reached the final cascade of notes, the devastating conclusion where Chopin pulls every thread together and then releases them into silence. His hands lifted from the keys. The last note hung in the air, resonating through the lobby's acoustic perfection, fading slowly like a held breath finally exhaled. No one moved. No one spoke. Richard stood 15 feet from the piano, his glasses in his hand, his face unreadable except for the tightness around his eyes. 2 minutes and 40 seconds had passed since James played the first note. He'd been supposed to stop after 30 seconds. No one had stopped him. Where did you learn to play like that? Patricia Chen's voice broke the silence, raw and unsteady. James opened his eyes. His hands were shaking now, adrenaline draining away and leaving exhaustion in its wake. He looked at Richard, waiting for the dismissal, the security escort, the permanent ban from the building. But the CEO hadn't moved. Behind those gold frames, now back on his face, something had shifted. "My mother," James said. The words came out hoarse. "She worked 3 jobs to pay for lessons starting when I was 6. Teacher named Mrs. Rodriguez, charged $40 an hour in a basement studio in Queens that smelled like mildew and old sheet music. Mom never missed a payment. Not once in 12 years. The lobby remained frozen. James stood from the bench, legs unsteady. "When I got accepted to Juilliard at 17, we both cried. Full scholarship, everything covered. She said it was proof that God remembered people like us." His voice cracked. Then sophomore year, she collapsed at work. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, spread to her liver and lungs before she even knew she was sick. I withdrew from school to take care of her. Worked warehouse shifts, then sat with her through chemo that made her so sick she couldn't remember my name some days. Patricia wiped her face with the back of her hand, no longer caring who saw. David Morrison, the young analyst, had gone pale. "She made me promise I'd go back to music. Wrote me a letter 3 weeks before she died, her hands shaking so bad I could barely read it." James pulled the folded paper from his pocket, held it up so they could see how worn the creases had become. "She said talent was the only inheritance poor people could leave. That if I let the world silence me, everything she'd sacrificed would disappear like it never mattered." He unfolded the letter, his mother's handwriting wavering across the page like a seismograph recording an earthquake. The words were few, but they carried the weight of 20 years. Asterisk James, my beautiful boy. Don't let them tell you music is a luxury. Art is how we prove we were alive. Play for both of us. Show them what love can build even when the world says no. Your hands are my hands now. Make them remember we existed. Make them feel something true. Asterisk. The silence that followed felt like a physical presence. Thompson, the security guard, turned away and pressed his palm against his eyes. The Juilliard graduate who'd been recording was openly sobbing, not bothering to hide it. Richard stepped forward. His movements were slower now, deliberate in a way that suggested he was fighting against every instinct his position had trained into him. "What was your mother's name?" "Elena Reyes." The name hit Richard like a punch to the sternum. His face went white. "Elena Reyes. 4th floor night shift. You knew her." James's voice climbed with desperate hope. Richard's hand went to his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone with fingers that had started to tremble. He scrolled through something, his jaw clenching tighter with each second. Then he looked up, and the expression on his face made everyone in the lobby lean forward. 12 years ago, Richard said quietly, my daughter overdosed. Prescription pills, mixing things she shouldn't have mixed. She was 16. We found her in the bathroom of my penthouse apartment at 3 in the morning, lips already turning blue. The assistants behind him froze. They'd never heard him speak about his daughter. She was a forbidden topic, a door sealed shut by trauma and shame. We called 911, but I knew, I could see she wasn't breathing right. We were on the 40th floor. Every second mattered. I ran into the hallway screaming for help, and there was a cleaning woman finishing her shift. She didn't speak much English, but she understood. She performed CPR on my daughter for 7 minutes straight while we waited for paramedics. Cracked 2 of her ribs bringing her back, but she brought her back. Richard's voice broke. He paused, gathering himself with visible effort. I never got her full name. Security logged her as E. Reyes, 4th floor custodial staff. I tried to find her afterward, wanted to thank her properly, set up a fund, something. But she changed shifts or buildings, and in the chaos of getting my daughter into rehab and managing the board's questions about why I was taking leave, I lost track. I've thought about her every day for 12 years. James couldn't breathe. The lobby had gone so quiet that the hum of the fax system became deafening. Your mother saved my daughter's life, Richard said, and his voice carried the weight of a debt that could never be repaid. Caroline is 28 now. Married, 2 kids, working as a counselor for teens in recovery. She's alive because of your mother. Patricia Chen approached Richard slowly, her tablet in hand. She'd pulled up employment records, cross-referencing dates and names with practiced efficiency. So, I have Elena Reyes listed in our archive personnel files. 4th floor custodial, employed from February 2008 to March 2020. Reason for departure, medical leave, never returned. There's a notation here. She received a commendation in February 2012 for extraordinary action during emergency, but no details. Richard took the tablet, stared at the entry like it was a message from the dead. My head of security filed that. Said protocol prohibited discussing the specifics to protect my family's privacy. I signed off on it without reading the full report. He looked at James, and behind those gold frames, his eyes had gone red. I never knew her name. I never thanked her. And now she's gone. The weight of it settled over everyone. Not just the tragedy of a life ended too soon, but the cosmic cruelty of a debt unpaid, of 2 people whose lives had touched with such profound consequence but never connected again. Jamesy's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the piano bench, the letter still clutched in his hand. She never told me. Never mentioned saving anyone's life. Just came home from work and made breakfast like always. That's who she was, Richard said softly. She saw someone dying and didn't think about credit or reward. She just acted. He removed his glasses, set them on top of the piano with a care that suggested ritual. And I've spent 12 years running a company, making money, building a legacy. Never once thinking to search harder for the woman who gave me back my daughter. Before any more can be said, I need to pause for just a moment. If this story is moving you, if you're feeling what I'm feeling, show it. Hit that like button, drop a comment about which part hit you hardest. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already. Because stories like this, stories about people who matter even when the world says they don't, those are what we're here for. And check the description box below for more stories that will make you feel this deeply. Patricia cleared her throat, her voice still thick with emotion. Mr. Caldwell, the board meeting starts in 6 minutes. Richard didn't look away from James. Cancel it. Cancel everything today. Reschedule the merger call. Push the investor briefing. I don't care what excuse you make. He turned to his assistant with an expression that brooked no argument. This matters more. The assistant's fingers were already flying across a tablet, sending messages that would ripple through the company's entire schedule. Junior analysts would scramble to adjust presentations. Conference rooms would be reassigned. Millions of dollars in potential deals would wait, because for the first time in his career, Richard Caldwell had found something that mattered more than the next transaction. He turned back to James. You came here asking for 5 minutes of consideration. You'll have whatever time you need. Starting now. 6 weeks passed like water finding new channels, reshaping everything it touched. James woke up each morning in a studio apartment in Brooklyn, still disoriented by the fact that the bed was his and the lease had his name on it. Sunlight came through actual windows instead of the fire escape view he'd had before. The building had heat that worked, water pressure that didn't die at random intervals, and neighbors who didn't scream through the walls at 3 a.m. Richard had arranged it through contacts, paid 6 months upfront before James could protest. It's not charity, the CEO had told him firmly. It's a long overdue payment of debt. But the apartment was just the beginning. Richard had enrolled James at the Manhattan School of Music, pulling strings with the dean to arrange a special re-entry program for students who'd left due to hardship. Full scholarship, no questions asked. The school had been skeptical until James auditioned for the faculty committee, played the same Chopin piece that had stopped Richard's world 6 weeks earlier, and 3 professors argued over who would take him as their primary student. James practiced 8 hours a day now, his fingers rebuilding the calluses and muscle memory that 2 years of warehouse work had softened. His teacher, Dr. Harrison, a 70-year-old Hungarian immigrant who'd escaped communism with just a suitcase and his skills, pushed him relentlessly. "You have the gift," Dr. Harrison told him after the first week, "but gifts mean nothing without discipline. You lost time. We will steal it back from the universe." Thompson, the security guard, started taking night classes at community college. Business administration, funded by a scholarship program Patricia Chen had quietly set up after that morning in the lobby. She'd never married, never had kids, poured all her maternal instinct into her work. Watching Thompson's transformation, the way he carried himself differently now, spoke about his daughter with tentative hope, filled a space in her chest she'd forgotten existed. Richard's trajectory had bent too, though in ways harder to quantify. He still ran Meridian, still closed deals and maximized shareholder value. But something had cracked in his carefully constructed armor. He attended Caroline's therapy sessions when she asked, sat through tearful conversations about the parts of his parenting he'd gotten catastrophically wrong. "I was so busy building an empire," he told her during one session, "that I forgot to build a relationship with you." Caroline forgave him, slowly, in pieces. Showed him pictures of her kids, his grandchildren, that he'd barely made time to notice before. Invited him to their school plays and soccer games. He went to all of them, sitting in bleachers alongside parents in Costco jeans, cheering too loud because he'd never learned how to do it right the first time. The changes at Meridian rippled outward. Patricia convinced the board to launch a scholarship fund named after Elena Reyes, aimed at children of service workers, custodians, security guards, cafeteria staff, whose talents might otherwise go unnoticed. The first year's budget was $2 million. Applications flooded in from across the country. Kids who could code, paint, engineer, write, compose. Kids whose parents worked 3 jobs and still couldn't afford college application fees. The Juilliard graduate who'd recorded James's performance uploaded it to YouTube with a simple title, "Never Judge a Book." It went viral. 5 million views in the first week, 20 million by the end of the month. Comments poured in from people who'd been dismissed, overlooked, told they didn't belong. The video became a touchstone, shared by teachers with struggling students, by parents with kids who wanted to quit, by anyone who'd ever been underestimated. David Morrison, the young analyst who'd felt something crack open in his chest that morning, quit Meridian. Used his savings to enroll in art school, despite his father's fury and predictions of poverty. Sent Richard a letter explaining why, thanking him for demonstrating that it was possible to change course even when the world said you couldn't. Richard framed the letter, hung it in his office where his MBA used to be displayed. But not everyone transformed. The analysts who'd laughed when James walked to the piano scattered to other firms, their reputations subtly poisoned by Patricia's whisper network. She never said anything explicit, just let it be known that certain types of cruelty weren't tolerated at Meridian anymore. The industry noticed. 2 of them left finance entirely, unable to find positions that matched their qualifications. The third stayed, but his career plateaued, trapped in mid-level positions while his former peers climbed past him. James gave his first public recital 8 weeks after that morning in the lobby. Small venue, just 100 seats in a converted church in the village. Richard sat in the front row beside Caroline and her family. Patricia and Thompson occupied the row behind them. Dr. Harrison stood at the back, arms crossed, watching his student with the critical eye of someone who knew exactly how far James still had to go. James played 3 pieces. The Chopin that had started everything, a Rachmaninoff prelude that Dr. Harrison had assigned to rebuild his technical precision, and finally a short piece he'd composed himself. The last one made people cry, not because it was technically perfect, but because it was honest. A conversation between mother and son, rendered in notes instead of words. Grief transformed into something beautiful and permanent. Afterward, Richard approached him backstage. "Your mother would be proud." James nodded, couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. "I've been thinking," Richard continued, "about what you wrote in that letter. About making people remember you existed. She succeeded. Because of her, my daughter is alive. Because of her sacrifice, you're here. That kind of love doesn't disappear, it compounds." He handed James a small box. Inside was a medal, custom-made, with Elena Reyes's name engraved on the front. On the back, a simple inscription, *, she saved my daughter. She built a musician. She proved that worth isn't measured in dollars. *. Wear it when you play, Richard said. Let the audience know what real wealth looks like. 3 months in, the Elena Reyes Scholarship Fund awarded its first grants. 18 kids, ranging from a 12-year-old violin prodigy in Detroit whose mother cleaned offices, to a 19-year-old aspiring architect in Houston whose father worked construction and could barely read English. Patricia oversaw the selection process personally, reading every application, watching every audition video. She cried more in those 3 weeks than she had in the previous decade. James mentored 2 of the recipients, teaching them piano basics over video calls. One of them, a 14-year-old girl named Maya whose mother cleaned hospital rooms, reminded him so much of himself that he had to pause their first lesson to collect himself. She had the same hunger in her eyes, the same desperate need to prove that she mattered. You do this long enough, he told her, and you stop playing for yourself. You play for everyone who told you that you couldn't. You play for the people who sacrificed so you could have hands that make music instead of hands that scrub floors. You make the notes loud enough that no one can ever say you didn't exist. Maya nodded, understanding completely. Started practicing 6 hours a day, her mother sitting in the next room listening through thin walls, crying quiet tears of hope and pride. Richard instituted a new policy at Meridian. Every employee, from custodians to C-suite executives, received annual performance reviews that included questions about their dreams and aspirations outside work. The company partnered with local community colleges to offer tuition assistance for anyone who wanted to pursue education or skills training. 3 security guards went back to school. 2 cafeteria workers started certificate programs. A receptionist enrolled in nursing school. The board initially resisted, called it soft, impractical, a distraction from shareholder value. Richard overruled them with a speech that became legend within the company. We're not in the business of exploiting labor, he told the assembled executives. We're in the business of building value, and the highest value is human potential. Elena Reyes proved that. She worked for us for 12 years, and we never once asked if she needed more. That ends now. 2 board members resigned in protest. Richard replaced them with people who understood that profit and purpose weren't opposites. Meridian's stock dipped briefly, then stabilized. Employee retention improved. Productivity increased. Turns out people worked harder when they believed their employers saw them as human. Thompson graduated from community college with a 3.8 GPA. Got promoted to head of security operations, then enrolled in a bachelor's program for criminal justice. Started talking to his daughter again, awkward phone calls at first, but they found their rhythm. She invited him to her wedding. He cried through the entire ceremony, made a toast that had everyone laughing and weeping simultaneously. 1 year after that morning in the lobby, James returned to Meridian's headquarters for a performance that had been planned with meticulous care. The company was hosting its annual gala, a black tie fundraiser that typically raised $3 million for various charities while doubling as a networking opportunity for Manhattan's financial elite. This year was different. This year, every dollar raised would go to the Elena Reyes Scholarship Fund. Richard had insisted on it, overruling the marketing team's concerns about alienating donors who preferred their charity with a side of prestige and open bar. The lobby had been transformed. The Steinway remained in its central position, but now surrounded by photographs blown up to poster size. Elena Reyes at 25, smiling in her custodial uniform on her first day at Meridian. Elena with infant James in a tiny apartment kitchen, flour on her hands from making bread they couldn't afford to buy. Elena at his 8th grade graduation, beaming with pride despite the exhaustion carved into her face. Elena in the hospital, head wrapped in a scarf to hide chemo-induced baldness, still managing to smile for the camera. The guests arrived in gowns and tuxedos, prepared for the usual circuit of small talk and carefully calibrated generosity. Instead, they walked into a memorial that forced them to see the human cost of the systems they'd built and maintained. Many looked uncomfortable. Some left early, but most stayed, drawn forward by a story that refused to be ignored. James sat at the piano, wearing a suit Richard had insisted on buying him, Nothing too expensive, nothing that would make him uncomfortable, just something that fit properly and made him look like he belonged. The medal with his mother's name hung around his neck, visible above his white shirt. At 8 o'clock, the room fell silent. Patricia stepped to a microphone set up beside the piano. "Most of you knew Elena Reyes as the woman who cleaned your offices," she began, her voice carrying across the crowded lobby. "Some of you never knew her name at all. She was invisible in the way service workers often are, necessary but unnoticed, valuable but undervalued. What you didn't know was that she was also a hero." She told the story of that night 12 years ago. Told it plainly, without melodrama, letting the facts speak for themselves. Richard's daughter overdosed. Elena saved her life. Broke her own ribs in the process. Never asked for recognition or reward. Elena died 6 months before her son played that piano for the first time in this building, Patricia continued. She never got to see what her sacrifice built. But we're going to make sure she's remembered. Every scholarship we fund, every kid we help, every time we choose to see potential instead of poverty. That's Elena. That's her legacy. Caroline Caldwell stepped forward, her father beside her. She held her 2 children by the hand, a boy of 4 and a girl of 6, both dressed in their Sunday best. She spoke directly to the photograph of Elena, her voice breaking. "I don't remember you," Caroline said, tears streaming down her face. "I was dying, and you brought me back, and I don't remember your face or your hands or the sound of your voice. But I remember waking up in the hospital and seeing my dad crying, and I remember deciding that if I'd been given another chance, I needed to do something with it." She gestured to her children. "These 2 exist because you acted. My husband, my career helping other kids, all of it, none of it happens if you walk past our door that night. I've been trying to figure out how to thank someone who's gone. The only answer I have is to make sure you're not forgotten." Richard stepped to the microphone, his gold-framed glasses catching the chandelier light. He'd aged in the past year, new lines around his eyes, gray spreading through what had been predominantly dark hair. But he stood straighter somehow, carried himself with less rigidity and more presence. "I built a fortune teaching people that everything has a price," Richard said. "You quantify value, negotiate terms, maximize returns. I was very good at it. Made billions following that logic." He paused, looking directly at Elena's photograph. "But some things can't be quantified. Elena asked for nothing and gave everything. The math doesn't work, and that's the point. She proved that love operates outside economics." He gestured to James. Her son inherited that. Not money, not connections, just the belief that what you create matters more than what you own. He came to this building with nothing but his mother's letter and his own hands. In 30 seconds of music, he changed my entire understanding of worth. The room had gone completely still. 500 of Manhattan's wealthiest stood listening to a CEO confess that he'd been wrong about everything that mattered. "Tonight, you're not here to network or burnish your philanthropic credentials," Richard continued. "You're here to witness what happens when we actually pay attention to the people who make our lives possible." The scholarship fund has raised $8 million in its first year. We have applications from 2,000 kids. We can fund 60 of them fully. That means 1,940 talented, desperate, deserving children will be told no. He let that sit. Let the discomfort build. So I'm asking you to give until it hurts. Write checks that make your financial advisors nervous. Fund the kids whose parents clean your offices and raise your children and cook your meals. Do it because Elena Reyes saved my daughter and asked for nothing. Do it because James earned his place at that piano through 2 decades of sacrifice. Do it because you can, and because they can't, and because that's the only moral economy that matters. James began to play. Not the Chopin this time. Something new. Something he'd composed specifically for this night. A piece that started with his mother's hands guiding his childhood fingers, building through years of lessons and practice and love, then fracturing into the chaos of illness and loss, before finally resolving into something that sounded like peace on through suffering. The melody wove through conversations Elena never had, moments James wished he could give her, recognition that came too late to matter to her, but early enough to matter to others. The music filled the lobby, bounced off marble and glass and the faces of people who'd spent their lives insulated from real consequence. Patricia watched from the side, her tablet showing real-time donation totals. The numbers climbed steadily, 100,000, 500,000, a million. Someone pledged an endowment. Someone else committed to matching all donations up to 5 million. The total hit 15 million before James finished playing. Thompson stood in his security supervisor uniform, no longer guarding doors, but overseeing a team of 15 people he'd trained personally. His daughter sat in the front row, 8 months pregnant, their relationship still fragile but real. She'd flown in from California just for tonight, just to watch her father be part of something that mattered. The young analysts who'd mocked James a year ago weren't present. Some fired. Some fled to other firms, all carrying the lesson that cruelty has consequences even when you think no one's watching. David Morrison sat near the back, still adjusting to art school after a year, still fighting with his father, but creating paintings that actually meant something. He'd submitted one to a gallery last month. They'd accepted it. First show scheduled for spring. Maya, the 14-year-old piano student James mentored, had flown in from Detroit with her mother. The scholarship fund had paid for their flights, their hotel, given them a weekend in New York they'd never have afforded otherwise. Maya watched James play with the intensity of someone memorizing not just the notes, but the possibility that this could be her life too. James finished. Let the final chord resonate and fade. Lifted his hands from the keys, and looked out at 500 faces. Some were crying. Some were writing checks with shaking hands. All of them were changed, at least for tonight, at least enough to matter. Richard stood and applauded. Then Caroline, then Patricia, then Thompson, then everyone. The ovation lasted 3 minutes. James stayed seated at the bench, his mother's medal heavy against his chest, trying not to break down completely. When the noise finally died, Richard returned to the microphone. The fund just hit 18 million. That's 300 kids fully funded through college. He looked at James. Your mother cleaned offices so you could play piano. Tonight, you played piano so 300 kids can chase their own dreams. Tell me that's not wealth. Before we close this chapter, if this moved you, if you felt Elena's sacrifice, James's struggle, Richard's transformation, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video. Leave a comment telling me which moment hit hardest. Share it with someone who needs to hear that invisible people matter. Subscribe for more stories that prove love compounds even after death. And check the description box below for more narratives about human worth that can't be quantified. James stood, walked to his mother's photograph, and placed his hand against it. The gesture was simple, private despite the crowd. A son thanking a mother who'd given everything and asked for nothing. A musician honoring the sacrifice that built his hands. The audience understood they were witnessing something sacred. Stayed silent while James stood there, gathering himself, finding words that could never be adequate. She used to tell me that music was proof you existed, James said finally, his voice carrying despite its quietness. That poverty could steal everything except what you created. I didn't understand when I was young. Thought she was just trying to make me practice. He laughed, a broken sound. But she was right. She's gone. But tonight, 300 kids will get chances she fought to give me. That's not charity. That's her. Still building, still loving, still proving that what matters isn't what you own, it's what you leave behind that makes other people's lives possible. The room erupted again. Not polite applause this time. Standing, shouting, weeping openly. The kind of emotional release that comes when people realize they've been part of something that will outlive them. Patricia announced final donation totals, $22 million raised in 3 hours. Enough to fund scholarships for 400 kids annually in perpetuity, assuming modest market returns. Enough to change generational trajectories. Enough to prove that Elena Reyes's life, spent cleaning offices and raising a son and saving a stranger's daughter, had value that compounded across time and lives she'd never meet. Richard approached James after the crowd finally dispersed, after the photographers left, after the gala wound down to just a few people lingering by the piano. Handed him an envelope. Offer letter, Richard said. Not charity, not nepotism, a job. Meridian's establishing an arts initiative, partnering with schools and community centers to provide free music education. We need someone to run it. Someone who understands what's at stake. Salaries competitive. You keep studying, keep performing, But you also help build the infrastructure, so the next kid like you doesn't have to gamble everything on one performance. James opened the envelope. Read the terms. Looked up with eyes that couldn't quite process that this was real. Why? He asked. Because your mother taught me that wealth compounds, Richard said simply. Because that night she saved my daughter, she also saved me. Just took me 12 years to realize it. Because you walked into this building wearing a second-hand jacket and reminded 500 people that humans matter more than portfolios. Take the job. Honor her by making sure others don't have to fight as hard. James took the job. Started the following month. Built programs in 30 cities over the next 2 years. Found teachers, funded instruments, created pipeline programs that identified talent in places wealth usually ignored. 3 years after that morning in the lobby, Maya, the 14-year-old from Detroit, performed her debut recital at Carnegie Hall. James sat in the audience beside her mother, who wore her hospital custodian uniform because she'd come straight from her shift and didn't have time to change. Didn't matter. She belonged there exactly as she was. Elena Reyes never saw her son succeed. Never knew her CPR would save not just one life but compound across hundreds. Never understood that her letters and sacrifices would become a foundation that outlived her body. But her hands lived on, in James's music, in Maya's performance, in 400 kids who received scholarships, in Richard's transformation, in policies that made Meridian treat custodians like humans instead of furniture. Worth isn't counted in dollars. Legacy isn't built in boardrooms. Love compounds in ways economics can't measure. Elena Reyes spent 20 years proving it. The world just needed 12 more years to listen.